Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. The United States has a long history of nuclear testing in the tiny Pacific nation of the Marshall Islands, a history that produced enormous nuclear and now political fallout. Can the experience of one little country move a global policy on such an existential issue as nuclear disarmament? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Tony de Brum, the Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands. Minister, it's a great honor to have you on the program. Thank you for this opportunity. Now, a couple of weeks ago, the world commemorated the 70th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, and this is a story that is fairly familiar to people all around the world, and yet your nation has experienced dozens of similar explosions, sometimes of the same magnitude, sometimes of an even greater magnitude, and yet I think your story is more or less unknown to the people of the world. Why is that?
When the United States took over the islands of Micronesia as a trust territory after the war, World War II, they declared it a strategic trust, and the entire area was sealed off from the rest of the world until 1968. Between 1946 and 1958, the testing program of the United States was conducted in the Marshall Islands. Many of these shots were atomic, of course, but there were some hydrogen shots as well, most notably the Bravo shot of 1954, which was equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshimas.
Absolutely, but something like that is impossible to hide, and yet nobody seems to know about that.
I'm sure there were observers. The United States admits that some of its friends and some of its not so good friends were watching everything that was happening there. But the truth on the ground was never really revealed to the rest of the world until we were able to convince the United States in 1994 to release previously unreleased documents.
Now, Americans, if we talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Americans never made a secret out of that. In fact, I think they used it as a piece in their sort of framing of history. They had this story, at least, President Truman said that till his dying days, that bombing Japan with nuclear bombs helped save hundreds of thousands of lives. I wonder if there was a similar legend that was fed to the people of the Marshall Islands to explain why you had to leave under so many mushroom clouds.
The meeting to convince the people of Bikini to move to make room for the testing is well documented. The idea was, what was told to the people was that they were going to contribute their land and their lagoon for the promotion of international peace and security.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, the whole informational aspect of it is very striking. And I heard you say that on numerous occasions that not only then, but still now, the United States maintains similar pattern in terms of giving you access to information. First it's denial, then it's outright lying, and finally it's classification of all the material. Why do you think there is such a reluctance on the part of the United States to admit the damage done more than 50 years ago? I mean, they could have moved on since that.
The reason that is given to us is that the information must remain confidential, as it is in the security interests of the United States. We have an agreement with the United States that allows for us to become independent, and part of that agreement requires that we allow the United States to have defense responsibility and authority over our islands, same thing all the way to Palau. And part of that is that we should cooperate in items of international peace and security. So when they say that they classify these documents in that interest, that is the rationalization that they give us so that they can deny us access to that information. But we need that information.
You mentioned the explosion that took place at the Bikini Atoll, and this is, if I'm not mistaken, the largest U.S. nuclear test on record, more than one or around 1,000 times stronger than Hiroshima. And as far as I understand, you know about that not from books, but perhaps from your own experience. You had a chance to witness it with your own eyes. What was it like? I'm sure this is the kind of experience that one never forgets.
I am now over 70 years old. I was 9 years old when I saw that shot, and I still get
Goosebumps.
skin when I talk about it. I was fishing with my grandfather early in the morning when the shot went off, and mind you, we were never warned about any test being conducted. We would see it when it goes off, and we would say, "Oh, there's another bomb going off." But this one was spectacular. We felt the shock, we saw the flash, and then the entire sky turned red. It was as if, I've described it to my children and grandchildren this way, it was as if you were standing under a glass bowl and somebody poured blood over it. I will never forget that as long as I live.
I think to some extent you may describe yourself as a lucky one, because you certainly emerged from that perhaps with a sort of psychological trauma, but there were many people who had significant damage to their own health. I'm talking specifically about Project 4.1 here, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think it was one of the examples, essentially a human lab, where people were not so much treated, but actually studied and tested on the effects of radiation. You claim that that was actually part of the US government project. Why is it so important for you to bring that story to the public? Is it because you want them to know about the crime, or perhaps because you want to use it as a leverage for other goals, for other objectives?
The idea of nuclear weapons being used to promote world peace and security is, to me, absurd. And the effects of nuclear testing, the way they were in the Marshalls, the secretive nature of the entire enterprise, and the fact that they will not release to us the true information pertaining to that series is to us indication enough that this is a weapon that we should get rid of forever from this earth. The Project 4.1 was conceived in 1953. Bravo was in 1954. So if they did not intend to do any studies on human beings, why is it that there was a 4.1 project described in 53 that went into effect 2 days after Bravo? That they have never answered until today.
But studying the effects of radiation is, I guess, a legitimate scientific venture. It is not treating people that I think raises a lot of moral issues. What makes you so sure that the goal was in getting the scientific knowledge rather than helping those people?
The treatment of the people who were exposed and the Project 4.1 were separate from each other. And Project 4.1 scientists and doctors did not treat people if they found something that needed treatment, they refer them to another team of our own local doctors to treat. So there's no question from my standpoint that 4.1 was experimental, and it's a study of human beings exposed to radiation, and it had nothing to do with actually treating people who were exposed.
Mm-hmm. Now, last year, the Marshall Islands launched what some have described as a quixotic project. You brought lawsuits against all 9 nuclear weapon states, including Israel, including Russia, including the United States, China, etc., in the International Court of Justice. And you've argued that they all failed to deliver on their obligations of nuclear disarmament. Now, is that not tilting at windmills in a sense that, you know, we've seen in recent years that countries prioritize their security considerations much stronger than, let's say, legal ones. And unfortunately, the reality of today's world is such that big nations, it is left up to the big nations to impose international law on themselves, and to the extent that they deem acceptable.
Just because they deem that acceptable doesn't mean it's right. What is right is to honor your treaty obligations. And all these countries have signed on to except for 2, which we have named in that lawsuit as well. They've committed to begin negotiations to disarm. Having seen firsthand what nuclear weapons do to human beings, we thought that we had enough of a mandate to stand up to say, enough is enough. Please sit down at the table and talk about getting rid of the world of these nasty weapons of mass destruction. We don't think that is quixotic at all. We've had other experiences. It took us 17 years to become independent and terminate the trusteeship. When we started that here in New York in 1976, we were called crazy as well. But I think that it is important that people understand we are not seeking compensation, nor are we pointing fingers at them. We're just saying, look, you agreed to this treaty. We joined this treaty because we believe that we would gain freedom from nuclear weapons by becoming part of that treaty. You are not living up to your obligation to disarm or to negotiate disarmament. Please sit down and negotiate. That's all we're saying.
Now, Russia, China, the United States don't agree on much these days, but I think when it comes to the issue of nuclear disarmament, they all have a ready answer that they cannot do it on their own. You know, they cannot do it alone. And one of the reasons, of course, cited by all these countries is that they see nuclear weapons as their ultimate protection against an attack by another nuclear state. This is also one of the reasons why perhaps we are witnessing an arms race, both nuclear and conventional arms race around the world. I want to ask you something that perhaps you would find questionable, but I know that the Marshall Islands still hosts one of the most important anti-ballistic sites for the American Army. And this is an issue of much concern both for Russia, for China, and for other countries. If you believe so strongly as you do in nuclear disarmament, don't you think that perhaps the first thing to do would be to try to limit the American military access to your territory? That could also be cited as one of the pretexts for arms race.
First of all, we do not see the testing of the delivery vehicles for nuclear weapons as any different from testing nuclear weapons. But one must remember that when we were fighting for independence, there was some cost put ahead of us, one of which was that the United States be granted defense responsibility. And that was the cost of independence. We hope that they will, through this process of re-examining of the National Non-Proliferation Treaty, the wisdom of getting rid of nuclear weapons, and if that translates to getting rid of missiles, that's fine too. But the notion that mutually assured destruction is in itself a way to preserve peace and tranquility in this world is absurd. We know that. Everyone knows that to say that if you do this, I will press the button and then I will kill you. If you press that button and he presses that button and the other guy presses the button, the universe is gone. So how does that save anybody? It doesn't save anyone at all. You nor me, nor Russia, nor US, nor China. They should come to their senses and start disarming.
Minister de Brum, we have to take a very short break now, but when we come back, climate change and global warming threaten the very existence of many island communities around the world. But can the problem be effectively tackled without some major powers starting to feel the pinch as well? That's coming up in a moment on Worlds Apart. Stay tuned.
Люди залезли в цивилизацию и думают, все, огородились от природы. По своей привычке немцы много не разговаривают, так и не кричат ни о чем. Если уж земля продырявила, значит, ему это суждено было. А кричать начнешь, привлечешь посторонних людей.
Видите, как расширяется жерло воронки. Уже можно говорить, что это озеро.
Я спрашиваю, какой он был, хозяин этого озера. Она говорит, очень страшный.
Welcome back to Worlds Apart, where we are discussing nuclear testing and climate change with the Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands, Tony de Brum. Minister, just before the break, we were talking about the threat that nuclear weapons pose to global security, and in your hierarchy of threats, I think this is number one. But an issue that comes in second is climate change. And I think in the case of the Marshall Islands, there is a very dangerous convergence between these two, precisely because of the nuclear legacy. You have a very large nuclear waste dump, as far as I understand, on one of your atolls that is being already affected by the rising sea levels with the potential of nuclear leakage. How serious is the problem? Are we likely to see another Fukushima-style scenario in action?
Climate change is affecting all facets of life in the Marshall Islands right now. And like our nuclear legacy, it's something that we have nothing to do with. We are at the, we'll call the spear end of the effect and the impact, but we don't have control over what's causing it. The effect of sea level rise and salt inundation and acidification and destruction of food and food sources in the Marshalls from climate change is as real as some of the lingering effects of the nuclear testing program. We have been trying to impress upon our development partners that this is a security issue, just like the other issue is. Now, there are areas of the Marshalls that were not totally clean after the testing program. And with the effect of climate change and the tide rising, some of the contaminated material in the soil is being affected. That's one part. The cap storage is another one. We're concerned that what is contained in these nuclear storage areas may be leaking into the lagoons and may affect other areas of the ocean, of the atolls. There is also the problem that there are things that were buried in the soil, and recently people who are not familiar with what happened in the 70s are beginning to dig up non-ferrous metal for sale, and thereby stirring up dust. And as you know, plutonium dust is much dangerous than any other form of open air contamination, and we're concerned about that and have asked for assistance.
Now, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, under the agreement that you reached with the Americans, the Marshall Islands agreed to settle all claims, past, present, future, related to the U.S. Nuclear testing program, and by the nature of those agreements, it is your responsibility to take care of the dome and the cleanup. Are you trying to renegotiate the terms of that agreement, or are you claiming that perhaps that agreement was reached in bad faith without you fully aware of the scale of the problem?
That agreement was reached based on information provided to us by the United States. They said, you have X problem, and this is the solution, Y. We since then found out that X was not really accurate assessment of what the problem was, and Y is insufficient to address it. In the agreement itself, there is a provision that if new circumstances were discovered later, we can raise them with the United States. That's exactly what we're doing. We're following the letter of the agreement. The United States is saying, no, we don't think there's a new circumstance. We're saying what you told us and what is the reality of the situation are two different things.
Do you think that was a deliberate misinformation, or just they didn't know at the time?
I cannot make a conclusion on that right now, except to say that that it seems that the extent of damage versus what we were told was the extent is so great that there had to be some misunderstanding as to the measurements that were taken at the time.
Now, your country is one of 4 designated as most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And I know that you've been a very, very passionate, very vocal advocate of drastic greenhouse emission cuts. You actually are promoting a sort of a target that is even more ambitious than the one that the UN has endorsed. And the UN target of 2 degrees Celsius at the moment seems to be out of reach. So my question to you is whether you are perhaps asking for too much? Because when you ask for too much, you run the risk of getting nothing in return and being sort of brushed away.
If you place your goals too high in terms of global warming, then it means nothing to us. Anything over 2 degrees for the small island countries of the world is your demise. That means the islands won't be there anymore. That means there'll be no more country, no more tradition, no more language, no more people. That's what we're trying to fight. And it is not out of hand to insist that people keep 1.5 degrees as their goal in climate change. Because sure, some of the indications now might indicate we're talking about 3 degrees rather than 1.5 or 2 degrees. If that's the case, then we should have the mechanisms built into the agreement that will allow for the world to make those adjustments to get back on track to reach 1.5. We're not trying to say this is an unreachable goal, but we need to put it in there so that, no. We think that it can be done. If regular reviews are held and ratchet of ambitions are indicated every 5 years, if we take science and technology and plug it into the system, we can in fact make those goals that we've set for ourselves. It is more dangerous to say that because we cannot reach 1.5, we should accept 3 degrees, because the science has already told us that 2 degrees is already dangerous for my country.
Mm-hmm. Now, your Pacific neighbor, Kiribati, has already come up with a very interesting and, to me, a very surprising solution. I mean, they already bought a giant plot of land in Fiji with an intention of evacuating their whole population. And I think to many people around the world, that is like moving your people to the moon. It is just as unrealistic as that prospect. But I know that you said that for your nation, at least at the time being, this is not acceptable because that would destroy your traditions, that would destroy your culture. Now, if the current trends continue, I think the Marshall Islands will be uninhabited by 2050. So is that not right time to accept reality, as painful as it is, and plan for any possible eventuality?
We cannot accept that reality, because that reality is based on estimates produced by developed countries and some developing countries based on their economic survival, not on their survival. So we cannot accept that. We have been displaced from our property long enough, 150 years. Foreign forces have come and moved us from one island to another for the sake of developing copra plantations, later developing military bases. We were under the Japanese government from 1914 until 1944. They shifted people around at will for preparations for war. We've had enough of that. Displacing people is not a solution. If we need to anchor those islands and raise them up, then we will go find partners to help us do that. There are people who know how to build more land, or raise the level of the land from 2 meters to 4 meters. Buying time by doing that will allow us to live in our country, maintain our tradition and our culture, until such time as the world gets smart enough and develop a climate change conscious, in order to prevent it from getting worse.
Well, speaking about that, you know that the Syrian civil war issue has been dominating the session of the UN General Assembly, and the problem with that war is that it's been going on for 4 or 5 years, and it wasn't until those refugees started arriving in Europe that the world started paying attention. My question to you, I can see your passion. The issues that you are describing are very, very close at hand. I mean, we are not talking about tomorrow, we are talking about today. But do you think that you have a realistic chance of moving the policy until some big nation is actually directly affected by what you are describing?
If people are concerned today about refugees, economic refugees or some war refugees, as we know, those situations will become Sunday picnic when people start moving because of climate change. We're talking about millions of people looking for shelter and looking for survival. That's going to be one massive change in the balance of the world. And that is not something that anyone relishes thinking about. Of course, prudent governments must think about what to do in the event that lands become submerged, and we do that. But we do not want to admit defeat now by saying, okay, we can't make 1.5, so let's start talking about moving people to Fiji or Australia or Wyoming, USA. No. We want to do what we can to remain where we are and to preach resilience and adapt to the change.
Now, speaking about Sunday picnic, there are some estimates that there could be as many as 1.7 million climate refugees in the Pacific by 2050 and around 200 million globally. And we recently saw those pictures of, children's bodies washed up on the shores, parents trying to desperately save their children in open seas. Do you think this is something that is first going to scare the world into action? And how far are we from the repetition of something like that in your context?
In our view, that is something that we must stop from happening. And the thing is that the science says this is the problem. Science also has the solutions. The world has, all the economic powers of the world can put their efforts together to make this a soluble issue. But the problem is that people want to do business as usual. They do not want to change their way of life. They don't want to change their styles to reflect the reality of the world, to make sure that we save this planet. We believe we were put in this world to make sure that it's better for the next generation and the next generation, not to destroy it and then leave them with nothing. And that's part of the reason such a small country like the Marshalls or like Kiribati, Tuvalu, Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, fight this climate battle as hard as we do. For us, it's not just a matter of business as usual or bottom line or making sure that you export enough tuna. No. It's a matter of life and death.
We talked about what the United States did in your neighborhood, but Washington wasn't acting in its unilateral capacity. It actually had a UN mandate to do that. It was an administrator on behalf of UN at that time. When you speak to the international community as passionately as you do, what makes you believe that they would actually respond? Because, injustices were done to your people before, and we are still seeing those injustices done to other people around the planet. So what sustains your belief that you can actually, a tiny country like yours, that you can move things forward?
What option do I have? Someone needs to speak up.
Well, you have an option of enjoying your beautiful shores as they still exist. I mean, that would be one option.
What do I tell my 9 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren? Papa is going to enjoy this, but you guys won't have this to enjoy when I'm dead? No. I'm going to make sure that something is left for them that's better than what I have. And that's why you will find throughout the Pacific, I'm just a small voice. There are many that are much more eloquent, and they speak with much more passion. But together, I think we can convince the rest of the world that this is indeed a worthy fight, and it is a righteous cause, and that in the end we will prevail.
Well, Minister, I wish you all the luck in this very difficult endeavor. I really appreciate your time here. And to our viewers, please share your comments on our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages. And I hope to see you again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.